Okay.
Now we are.
Okay. Hey. All right. This is Andrea Yount. We are preparing for Therapy Thursday, our weekly broadcast on mental health topics. Therapy Thursday is brought to you by Affinity Counseling Services and A Lovely Pause. This is a test.
Affinity Counseling Services is located in Piggott, Arkansas and Kennett, Missouri. We currently have 4 therapists in our office and are taking new clients. To join our sign-up sheet, visit counselingwithaffinity.com, and to find out more, you can call me, Kindred, at 870-324-5122 or 573-840-0440. Thanks.
And A Lovely Pause is a local nonprofit created to provide community education, awareness, coping skills, and support for those with PTSD and other trauma-related disorders. June is PTSD Awareness Month, and this month we are featuring Fear Response Worksheet. Find out what the 4 fear responses are, what their function is, and what happens when they become overused. Use our reflection section to become more aware of your fear responses in various situations. Sign up for our newsletter and stay up to date on our fundraising progress, current and upcoming events, exclusive freebies, and more. Sign up at A Lovely Pause, PAUSE.com.
This is a test.
We good.
Therapy Thursday normalizes discussing mental health topics in a safe, supportive environment because not being normal is normal.
Welcome, everyone, to Therapy Thursday, our weekly installment here at Affinity Counseling Services, where we talk about different mental health topics from a personal and professional perspective. My name is Matthew Yount, lead therapist and president here at Affinity Counseling.
I'm Andrea Yount. I am the vice president of Affinity, and I'm the chair of the board for A Lovely Pause.
And I'm Stacy. I am president of Hive Minds Marketing.
You own the thing.
Right, yeah. I guess owner of Hive Minds Marketing.
You'll figure out what you are one day.
Yeah.
It changes so often.
I need to write this down. And vice chair at A Lovely Pause.
And I am behind the camera as always, taking your questions, comments, and concerns. Kindred. I'm also the secretary of the board for A Lovely Pause and the
You're an office manager here, yes.
At Affinity.
Should we just write these roles down somewhere? I wouldn't tattoo them on you because they'll probably change in the next year
We
or
have
two.
so much to do, we forget what we're doing.
Yes.
We should we could get little name tags made. Not like desk ones.
But we would need like a scroll, right?
A desk scroll.
All the roles that I do,
Desk
how do I narrow
scroll
that
in a
down?
jar.
You're going to have some new ones to add to yours pretty soon.
Yes.
Yeah, you're going to be a business owner here shortly.
Yeah, we can't talk about that yet.
Not yet. Well, soon enough, though.
Very soon. Maybe
Another
next week.
business owner, yes.
Maybe next week.
Yes. Well, maybe next week. We'll see how all that turns out. I don't even want to think about it right now. Okay. Welcome, everyone. We are going to continue our discussion on our monthly topic about PTSD. And today we're talking about the stigmas of PTSD. Is there anything that we need to talk about? Do you have any fundraisers or anything coming up that we need to be aware of?
Not currently. We haven't. No.
Okay.
I mean, we will soon, but
Yeah, sometime I'm guessing toward the end of July there'll be something come up, right?
yes, somewhere
All right.
around there.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about it then.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if we got nothing really to discuss regarding A Lovely Pause, we'll get into today's topic. So, the stigmas of PTSD. So, when we talk about PTSD, I think there is a common image that most people get based on what we know about the history of PTSD. So, what is the most common image that people associate with post-traumatic stress disorder?
Soldiers returning from war.
Yeah, that seems to be it. And primarily, the wars we tend to think about are like Vietnam War. But it can be any conflict, really. But that seems to be like where it really became popular. The idea of PTSD really started to become better known after the Vietnam War, several years after the Vietnam War, because in the beginning, they really didn't understand what was going on. there was a general idea amongst mental health professionals, but it didn't really, the public was not all that aware of it. And then, but we really got to know more about PTSD, like as a diagnosis, after World War II. It was studied from the effects of World War II. They called it shell shock and a few other things at the time. But it was mostly, we saw it in the most, we recognized it in the most intense circumstances, so like war, where people were in very tragic situations. They had seen terrible things, maybe had done things that were against their value system, taken out of situations where they had any type of feelings of control, and then put in an unsafe environment for long periods of time. And while that can accurately describe warfare, it can also describe many other situations that people are put in on a regular basis. So it should be well understood at this point that PTSD is absolutely not just a military diagnosis. In fact, the vast majority of people who have PTSD are not in the military, just frankly because of the numbers alone. You know, most people aren't in the military to begin with. But the vast majority of PTSD comes from other situations that are way more common and that are readily available to people to get PTSD from, so like car accidents or living in a dangerous neighborhood, living in a dangerous environment or household, being around abuse. All of those things can create PTSD. So we can understand that PTSD can come from many common circumstances, but why do you think it is that people are so afraid to say they have PTSD?
I think it makes, I think there's a stigma that you're unstable, you're unsafe, possibly, you know, like a lot of times in the media or in TV shows or movies, they show people mostly, you know, soldiers, usually, and usually they come off as very unstable or unsafe acting, and that can be, you know, that can be the truth, but that's not always the case.
Yeah, the symptoms for one person with PTSD is not across the board for everyone with PTSD.
Yeah, especially the intensity or severity of the symptom as well. So, like, for example, the classic idea of, we look at the worst case scenario, PTSD, is somebody having a flashback and thinking they're surrounded by enemy soldiers and wanting to fight or wanting to shoot, and so makes them look unstable or unsafe. And that is very, 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 very rare that something like that actually happens. Most of the time when people are having like a flashback from PTSD, it's not like this visual, I see myself back in a past circumstance and I can't even acknowledge the reality around me, and I'm stuck back in that moment and I'm seeing it happen and I'm responding to it as if it was happening right now. While that can happen, that's incredibly rare as well. Most of the time, it's a strong sense of being in a dangerous circumstance that feels very familiar to whatever the trauma was that happened at the time. And that strong feeling and sense is being overlaid on your current environment at the moment. So it's like your senses are telling you, I'm back in a dangerous circumstance, but your other senses are telling you, but you're here right now. And it can become very difficult to kind of tell where you are, what you're doing. You're trying to engage with the reality in front of you, but you've got the reality of the past going on in your head at the same time, and that can shift and happen between varying degrees of severity.
And like we've talked about, not just you're feeling that sense of that overwhelm of emotions and that feeling of danger and that feeling of wanting to run, and you're in a situation where, you know, maybe you're aware that it's not that big of a deal, but you feel like it is on the inside, and so you're trying to suppress that. And so then when those overwhelms do happen, a lot of times an outburst can happen because you're trying to suppress it, not because of what's actually going on. It's because of the suppression. So one stigma would be that people have that outburst, but we've talked a lot about how support and communication is so important, and that's why, because if you can communicate that or have someone there who notices that and help you communicate that, then those overwhelms don't happen as often.
Right. That was like how we were talking last week, that there was a client who bit her lip, right? That was like one of her tells. And so within her her family, right? That was something that they communicated and knew to pay attention to. And so, like what you're talking about there, getting those senses of overwhelm from trying to suppress it. If you have good communication and support with your people, then those outbursts are less likely to occur.
Yes, and you're in this hypervigilant state, this state of being aware of every danger or looking for danger or feeling like there's danger. So you definitely need a place where you can feel safe to be able to express those things.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the stigmas that also goes along with PTSD, I get this one a lot when I'm working with male clients, especially here in the South, is that I'll tell them that I'm going to diagnose them with PTSD, and they're like, no, don't do that. I don't want to lose my guns. And so one of the main stigmas they think is real is that if I have a PTSD diagnosis, the law is going to show up and take away my weapons from me, or I'm not going to be allowed to have them anymore, or I can't purchase new weapons. And and then there's a lot of stigma in the news now that we need to do mental health background checks to make sure that people who don't need weapons don't get them. And so that automatically makes some of the people who have PTSD assume well, does that include me? Because I don't think I'm dangerous.
I feel like that's just pertaining to people who have homicidal or suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, but that can be really hard to determine. Now, because
you can lie on a screening.
Oh, yeah, you can totally lie. If somebody's like, hey, do you want to kill somebody? I want to say no. I think I'll say no. No, I don't want to. And you can certainly pretend as if you don't want to. Now, and I think what they're talking about in those circumstances is people like me who would call up some type of registry or and say, hey, this person is threatening to kill people. They probably don't need a gun right now. Please don't sell them one. Or you might want to go check on them, by the way. And I can see that having good and bad. But, a lot of times people just who have PTSD, they assume that, well, if all that stuff passes, that means they're going to come take my weapons away from me. And most people with PTSD are not dangerous. I mean, if they were, we would have way worse homicide rates or even just attacks with weapons or battery in general. We would have a lot more of that occur because a lot of people have PTSD.
A lot of people have PTSD and don't know it.
Way more people than you ever realize that you have ever known have PTSD. Or at least have a lot of the symptoms of PTSD. They may not have enough to be full-on clinical, but they have a lot of effects of trauma. At this point, how long I've been doing mental health work, and especially working with adults, I think a good portion of mental health issues is trauma related in some way. And so
it's obvious. It's definitely biological. It's definitely biological and genetic, and can be that. But a lot of it is trauma related.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And so what we're looking at in these circumstances is people that are afraid that if I'm labeled as being dangerous, then I'm going to get something taken away from me that I don't feel like I'm going to use incorrectly. And I can understand that. Just because you're diagnosed with something like PTSD doesn't mean you're going to hurt anybody. But so that's a stigma that they have as well. Another stigma that I think that comes along with it is that people just automatically assume that people with PTSD are somehow broken. So if I say I have PTSD, or if you find out that I do, then maybe you'll see me as a broken individual. And I don't know, have you ever felt that way before? Have you been scared to tell people your diagnosis?
No, because it gave me a reason for the brokenness that I've displayed my whole life. I'm like, yes. So we're all broken though. Nobody's perfect. So we're all broken in some way. So it's just.
But is that because you have more of a supportive network though?
So what I think though is not necessarily that people think that we're broken. It's more that people think we can't function in society. Mm-hmm. We don't have the ability to function and have high level positions.
Not always.
Or
Some people can't.
That's right. There's a lot of people who can't, but
sometimes most of the time you can, and some days you're like, I can't function at all.
Right.
Yeah,
yes.
and that's more in the lines of having a mental health diagnosis, is that some days are worse than others.
Yes, and so yes, we can do things. We just have to do it a little bit differently We just have to manage our time and our schedule and ourselves a little differently. We can still do it. It's just different.
I've
Yes.
never viewed other people that have PTSD as broken, but maybe like myself, like look at myself that way, but not other people.
Sure.
So that's kind of
no,
my
I get
thoughts on
that. Yeah, and sometimes people, it's easier to see negative things in yourself than to think them about other people. Some people have that perspective. Some people judge more outwardly instead of inwardly. But it does come to, it happens a lot, wherein people who don't have a mental health diagnosis, who don't understand mental health diagnoses, or someone who doesn't have a diagnosis but had someone in their family that did and saw that person may have had issues with their mental health that was dangerous for other people, they project that out. So there's a lot of times there's that fear of what we don't understand.
I think the danger in mental health is not getting help. That's the danger. That's when it gets dangerous, because if you're out there just pretending like it's not there or whatever, then
Suppressing it.
Yeah, then you're suppressing everything, and a diagnosis might make you feel ashamed for some reason. But for me, and for a lot of people that I've talked to, a diagnosis actually was a relief, because then you have a reason about the way that you're reacting to all these things, and a way to figure out how to stop and how to actually make a life where you can not react to those symptoms that you're having.
Yes, because you
Or,
got
and
tools.
have them less. Yes.
Yeah, it gives you tools for your toolbox instead of just going around like, I don't need no stinking toolbox. I'm
Right.
fine.
Yes.
Yeah, Kendra, you look like you were going to say something a second ago. Did it leave your brain?
It did.
That's okay. That's fine.
Flew away.
If it flies back.
I think I was thinking about that, like, I started thinking about stigmas with other mental health diagnoses, about, like, because you mentioned if you've seen a family member. I was also thinking about how you could worry about the hereditary effects of someone else in your family having a mental health issue, like, I don't know, like bipolar.
Sure.
Or something.
Oh,
like
absolutely. Well, there's also this idea of epigenetics, and epigenetics is the idea that there's a possibility of passing things on that may not be inherent in a person's DNA. Like what would be inherent is like the gene for the eye color, in my family, or like the chances of me getting a specific eye color. That may be more inherent and then expressed later on. But the idea that like you can develop something like trauma, and that trauma can then be passed on to your next few generations, is something that we're starting to learn more about. I'll reference a study that I've heard about. Again, I haven't read it, so I'm just going to go off of it about hearing about it. But there's a lot of epigenetic studies out there. It's interesting to look into. There's one study that was done on the effects of trauma and passing that on to offspring in mice. And apparently what they did is they had mice in a cage, female mice that were pregnant, and they would spray a citrus smell in the cage and then shock their feet. And so they learned really fast to associate the citrus smell with fear because they were about to get shocked. And then apparently they took the babies from those mice and then separated them into a separate cage, sprayed the citrus smell, and then measured their cortisol levels in their blood. And their cortisol levels were higher when in the presence of that citrus smell, even without the shocking, because apparently the parent had passed on that fear of that smell on to the children. And which would make sense environmentally. If a new thing enters the environment that is dangerous, then it would make sense that if we could somehow develop that enters into our DNA and we pass that on, then our children would be more prepared to instinctually deal with something that's dangerous rather than having to learn it all on their own. I mean, instincts have to come from somewhere, and a lot of that's an environmental response. So there is a possibility that we can pass the effects of trauma down.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we look at our kids. Almost every one of our kids are geared toward anxiety. And so, I automatically saw the guilty look on your face when I said that. and which of course is absolutely not your fault. You can't help that your body has an automatic response.
And it's an anxious producing world that we live in.
Yeah,
too.
sure.
And they're all very highly sensitive kids. Like they all have sensory, and they I'm not going to say they haven't had any trauma because everybody has some sort of trauma at some sort of some
But
point,
they,
of course.
they all do.
right. But most of them have not had anything that would
They've
be
always
overly
been
significant.
that way.
Yes.
They've always been very highly sensitive.
Yeah. So they're more prone to anxiety, and some of them even share some of the same anxieties that you do, that they would not have had much of a reason to have that same anxiety based on their environment alone. So it's like they inherit those things along the way. And that's nobody's fault. It's just the way that your body works. But this is one of the good things about getting help for yourself, because if you get help for yourself and your kids have inherited some of these fears or traits or anxieties, then if you know how to cope with them, it's easier to teach them how to cope with them as well. And so that's why our kids are very trauma informed, and they know how to respond even to their own things. They're getting better at learning how to calm themselves down.
Yeah. Your guys' kids, you guys like have such a good like so many tools that you've given them so early in life that they utilize and I'm I think in my household too, like we try to have more of those kinds of conversations. I feel like we're at a turning point in society where we're starting to be more like aware of these things so that we can give tools to that next generation and break that generational passing on of traumas that like has been passed on for generations before us.
Yeah, and I think there are new stigmas that are beginning to come about related to trauma. The old ones are beginning to fade away. I mean, they're still present in the society because the human lifespan is fairly long, and these memories stick around, and they're so intense that they're kind of burned into the culture. But they are beginning to go away as newer generations come on, and newer generations are talking more about trauma and the effects of trauma. And I think the new problem we're getting into is too much information and not a lack of. And then also your information sources. There are way too many people on TikTok talking about things they really don't need to be talking about, that they think they understand what they're talking about, and they don't. But they're talking about it like they sure know what they're talking about because other people seem to like associate with it or respond to it, or they get likes off of it, and it's not good information.
Or people self-diagnose through TikTok and then start talking about their experience and like, hey, I'm this, and, and you have no idea. So
Right.
I mean,
There's
neurodivergence is a spectrum.
There's one guy on TikTok that I watch just because he thinks he knows what he's talking about. I laugh at him. He thinks he knows what he's talking. Like he talks about mental health stuff, but he's really toxic. Like very toxic.
Yeah, and you'll find that too. You'll find toxic people talking about mental health issues, and that's not who you need to get your mental health information from.
It is not. TikTok is not the place. Go to WebMD first. I don't know.
Yeah, or talk to somebody who's actually a professional.
Or Affinity, counselingwithaffinity.com. That would be a good place to go.
There's watch our show. I am a professional. There is absolutely nothing wrong with people talking about their experiences related to having trauma, and I think it's a wonderful thing that people are doing that.
Oh yeah,
This is
not
that.
that
I know.
was not even that. It is not. It is someone trying to tell everyone how to live their lives.
Yep. I have learned by watching people who have had trauma on TikTok talk about things that they've experienced and how they responded to it and how they reacted to certain circumstances. And that's great information too, because you're
the personal perspective.
Yes,
is good.
the personal perspective is awesome. It's when they try to
do the professional.
when they go from personal to try to being professional. That is the problem.
They don't have the proper information for it.
True. Yeah. So I think it is better that more people are talking about it than not. And even if some people are not having helpful conversations, it's better than very few conversations going on at all.
Or no conversation at all.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's the way it used to
A
be.
bad conversation, you can look at it and at least be like, well, that's wrong.
Yeah.
And move on.
Well, that's another stigma that I think has, at least in the past, been associated with PTSD. Is it's like they're weak people who can't get over it. because the way people look at them is like, well, you're not at war anymore, or that person died a long time ago. Why are you still like messed up about this thing?
Jillian has a question.
Yes.
I've heard some people that have shared their PTSD experiences, and people think that they're lying.
Okay, so what our intern said is that some people share their PTSD experiences and have been told they're lying. And yes, that absolutely has happened, and that has happened a lot, especially in like families with a lot of toxic issues. And I can tell you that one of the reasons that does happen is because sometimes, especially in family structures, what will happen is there will be generational trauma that's been going on for a very long time, like abuse has been perpetuated. And so like a person who has been abused learns to avoid their symptoms by shutting down and denying the abuse ever happened. And then somebody comes to them and says, hey, that person abused me. And they're like, no, they didn't. And that's the way they deal with it, is they're like, no, you must be lying, because since I deal with my trauma by acting like things don't happen, I can't have you bringing this stuff up too, because that's going to make me have to face my stuff, and I can't do that. And so since I'm pretending this didn't happen, I gotta pretend it didn't happen to you too. And now when that happens, that causes people to go into great distress, because one of the worst responses to trauma is not being believed. So it's
like gaslighting.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It
it
makes
is
you
a
feel
form
this-
of gaslighting. It's not
the
an
same
intentional
feeling.
gaslighting, but it is the same feeling.
Right. It's the same kind of feeling and confusion that you get from being from that situation.
Yeah, and it's very it exacerbates the PTSD.
I was going to say it's its own form of trauma.
Yes, it is. It's another trauma stacked on top of the trauma that you've already experienced at that point. So yes, a lot of times people are not believed, or they're afraid they won't be believed, or they're looked at it as, okay, well, that already happened and you should just get over it and this shouldn't still affect you. But trauma changes your brain. Yeah, you look like you're going to say something. Go ahead.
It's okay.
Okay. You had to get your filter working today? That was good.
What about the other end, where people trauma dump instead of holding it all in?
Oh, yeah.
Like
yeah.
you just meet somebody and they're like, here's my life story.
Yep.
And you're like, thank you very much. I'm going to put this right over here.
Yes. Yeah. Well, because some people, that is a way that they have learned. Okay, they ruminate. And so rumination is when you have something happen and you can't stop thinking about it. It basically becomes obsessive. And the reason that rumination is a huge problem is because the people will come to therapy and go, well, how is talking about this going to help? Because I think about it all the time, and I've told a bunch of people about what happened, and I don't seem to be any better.
Right. Because those people don't know what to do with the information that you're dumping on them.
Yeah.
That is a
Exactly.
part of it. The other part of it is rumination is happening usually in a dissociative state. So a person is zoned out
It's
and just
almost like
talking.
It's
They're
just
not
like a loop.
processing. It's
Yes.
like a
Just a
story. It's like almost like they're not even in that story. It's just a story they tell.
Yeah, right. And it's just looping in their head over and over again. And the part of the brain that's necessary for processing is not engaged at that moment because they've separated from the here and now. So to them, they're just stuck in the story. And I've worked with a lot of people that are just stuck in the past. And every day they're just reliving the past over and over again while their body is moving through the present. They can't plan a future. They don't even try to plan a future, because when they do, their mind just zaps right back to the past and they live in it. Because the part of the brain that is affected most by trauma cannot tell the difference between past, present, and future. So when it is stuck in that loop and you're dissociated, you've disconnected from the part of the brain that can tell the difference between past, present, and future, and now you're stuck in the past, living while your body is moving in a dissociative state, just living day to day, keeping you alive, essentially. And so, yes, it can make it where people feel as though they have just gone crazy, they're stuck in the past, and there's nothing that they can do about it. And so that is one of the stigmas that comes along with it too, is that fear of, I'm not going to ever be able to be better because I don't know how this will ever be fixed. So people get stuck in that mindset as well when they're trying to heal trauma.
And this is a good segue for EMDR.
It is, absolutely. So for those of you that may not be aware, EMDR is a type of therapy that we typically practice for trauma. And as I think I am learning to identify, I find it to be incredibly effective. It's at calming people down relatively fast and helping them process trauma at a really impressive rate. I mean, I have people that come in with really difficult traumas, and in like 1 to 3 sessions, the trauma has gone from like on a 0 to 10 scale of disturbance, from a 10 to a 0. To where when the memory is engaged in future sessions, it brings about a neutral response to the memory.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And there's very little talking that goes in with it too, as far as talking into
Yeah.
talking about your trauma
Yeah.
specifically.
In fact, most of my time is often spent trying to get people not to talk so much. It's they want to start going off into different trails, and I'm like, hey, let's go back to that memory. Come back to that memory again. We're just working with that one, especially people with complex trauma.
Jillian has another question.
Yeah.
When they realize that they worked through it, they're like, I can't believe that happened.
I know, right? Yeah. So what you were saying is, if people like, I can't believe I just got through that fast, or that's weird, I can't believe I feel that way, and it happens so fast that it's like that doesn't even seem like that should work. And part of me, when I was first learning it, I was kind of like, are they just telling me what I want to hear? So I try to stay as neutral as possible when I'm talking to them and just saying things like, tell me what you're experiencing right now. Just tell me what you're experiencing right now. So what are your thoughts? That way I'm not leading or guiding toward like, so do you feel better now? You know, I don't want to make them feel like they have to please me and say something. I just go, what do you experience? And now after doing this with enough people, it's been, I can see the progression of when it's going well or when it's stuck. And when it's going well, it's been very consistent. And then multiple sessions later, I can say, okay, let's bring up that past memory that we'd worked on before. Tell me what you experience. And they'll think for a second, they go, I don't really feel anything. Whereas before, when we engaged it, they were,
That's so awesome.
yeah, it's very cool.
That's great.
So very helpful for trauma.
And you can do that in person and on telehealth.
And telehealth too, yes. So thank you very much for joining us. And if you are looking for counseling services for PTSD, we are absolutely willing to help you. You can reach out to us at Affinity Counseling Services, AFFINITY, on Facebook. Or you can reach us by phone, 870-324-5122 for Arkansas. Or for Missouri, it's 573-840-0440. Or counselingwithaffinity.com.
And you can sign up this month for our fear response worksheet at alovelypause.com/thepause sign up. And that will get you on our newsletter, and you'll get all the cool exclusive freebies first before anybody else.
Yep. So thank you for joining us. I will not be here next week, so this will be y'all's first time to do this without me.
I won't be here either.
Yeah, it'll just be me and Kindred and Jillian.
Oh, sweet.
So Jillian's going to come on here, I think, with us. We haven't really totally officialized it.
You haven't
But
officialized
I think
it?
we just did right now.
Okay.
Jillian's looking side to side like,
Jillian's like,
are
I
we?
don't know. Do you want to do it,
Indeed.
Jillian? Yeah, she said last week she would, but we
Sweet.
didn't didn't
right.
make it official, so it's official now.
Y'all will do it next week then. Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.